Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on my revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers, she is from the Auckland University Department of Film, TV and Media Studies, one of the best bloggers in New Zealand, Phoebe Fletcher. And here's a life member of the Devonport Militia, speechwriter, tweeter and militant cyclist and survivor of awful car accident, David Slack. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, .com gate. Can John Banks really survive this? Issue 2, while that's diverting attention, ACC deceives over Bronwyn Puller's supposed threats and student loan repayment thresholds are lowered. What are the ramifications? Issue 3, David Cunliffe denounces the last 30 years of the Washington Consensus. Should Shearer be nervous? And we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off with issue 1. So, John Banks can't remember asking .com to split a $50,000 donation, can't remember calling .com to thank him, can't remember a helicopter ride to the richest mansion in the country, can't remember lobbying for .com's land, can't remember updating .com on his land lobbying, and now can't remember .com getting Banks a cushy hotel rate. David, how can someone with the memory capacity of an Alzheimer's sufferer be allowed to be a Minister of the Crown?
It's a very good question, and I think he should answer that question by handing in his notice forthwith. I think that would be a very good idea.
When the New Zealand Herald is calling for him to resign, a right-wing cheerleader like the New Zealand Herald, it's time, isn't it?
Well, I think it is, and I think that it's an embarrassment to politics, and it's embarrassment to his coalition partner, and it doesn't speak well of our political system that somebody can be this cute with it and not be compelled to walk up until now. And you know, the only thing that's been consistent about what he's done all the way through this episode is the manner in which he's consistently said, actually, yes, I did do the things you can prove, but I didn't do the things you can't. And then he just keeps changing. You prove a bit more. Oh, yes, I did do that. You prove a bit more. Oh, yeah, I did that one too. Oh, yeah. That one as well. And all the way finessing it with the legality of it and leaving daylight between him and the morality and ethics of the thing. And it's, you know, this really is toxic to people's perception of how politics works in New Zealand. That's the one major harm. The other major harm I see in this is what it's doing to the image of John Key as a man who looks for probity in his ministers. Where the hell is he in this?
Could you believe John Banks' interview on Radio Live where he tried to insinuate he wasn't in a gay homosexual relationship with Kim.com? Is that really the level that ministers should be able to should be able to answer questions regarding this?
Well, it does demonstrate that inside his mind is some kind of Angry Birds game that's just flinging things backwards and forwards, and sometimes all you get are shrieks.
Yeah.
And you know, that's
shrieks on a cabbage boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all. And it does take me back to some of the exchanges I've had with him. I was involved in a few election rallies in Epsom last year, and he was, of all of the candidates, he was the one who was the least forthcoming, the most robotic, and the most determined to do what he's made an entire political career out of, which is just treating us like saps and giving us sound bites for 5-year-olds. And I'm sick of being insulted, frankly.
Yeah. Phoebe, was it John Key's response to suddenly protect New Zealand from the non-existent hordes of boat people, a diversion tactic straight out of the Crosby Textor playbook? Has John Key handled this well?
I don't think John Key has handled this well. I think the boat people thing is part of a longer kind of background that you've got going on with agreements with Gillard and the Australian solution and looking at the possibility of a detention centre in Indonesia. I don't think that will get that much media. I think it will pass through. But Garner did a really interesting piece where he said basically they are trying to release everything that is on those ministers' desks this week as a diversion, and it is not working. Now, Banks might be right on the legality of that in terms of whether or not he had had to declare those donations. Farah's done an interesting blog today saying that under the Local Electoral Finance Act, which is something that Denise Roche of the Greens has asked to be reformed, that there is an allowance for anonymous donations, and it depends on whether he was a minister or not at the time, which he is not. However, this is not a good look for the government, and I think this is going to stick. I think this scandal is going to keep kind of unfolding, and I think even just a week before you had Labor on the attack over a $15,000 anonymous donation from Sky City that he didn't declare, that Len Brown declared, and today you had the launch of iPredict. Stocks
going through the roof.
Yeah, so I think this is something that does not make John Key look very good at all. It certainly looks terrible on John Banks. I mean, even Christine Rankin on the attack with John Banks. This is something that you don't see very often.
If they can prove that John Banks called .com and did thank him for the donation, that's it, isn't it? If they can prove that?
I think quite possibly. I mean, this is the other factor here is that it is .com, right?
Yeah.
So this is international news. I mean, you couldn't have a kind of more perfect storm in terms of the players that were here ready to unfold. I think this is it for Banks. Yes.
Well,
Dave,
and it also sorry.
Yeah. What did you make of ACT Party President Chris Simon's interview on Radio New Zealand yesterday,
last night.
where he admitted Banks had told him about the split donation, only to call back an hour later to claim he had used, and this is a direct quote, the wrong set of words. And he was hypothesizing.
This is an ineptitude that would have looked over the top in Fawlty Towers. The script writers would have pulled it back a bit. I'm just astonished at the haplessness of all of these players, and that Herald poll this week shows us that the ACT Party is now achieving the same polling level as a cabbage boat.
Wow.
They're both 0.
More people believe in UFOs than in ACT.
Yeah. And that's reassuring to know that our fellow New Zealanders can't be fooled, except for a few very towering chief executives.
Yeah.
Well, even Cactus Kate is saying, get him out.
Yes, I know. when Kathy Hodges is throwing their hat in on the right, it certainly is an interesting day. Phoebe, interesting that John Key will give John Banks the benefit of innocence before proven guilty, but won't extend that to Kim.com himself, who is facing internet piracy charges, which are increasingly looking less and less likely to convict him. When do the double standards start to hurt the government?
Well, I think it's hurting already. I don't know if you saw Campbell Live last night, but that piece where, when did John Key know about the raids? And they were tracing it back, and John Key was trying to say it was the day before, but you had this circle involving Morris Williamson. I think that this is going to hurt the Key government, and this is a scandal. It's one of those ones that's got legs, it's got newsworthiness, it's going to unfold.
Is it credible that John Key, the Prime Minister, would not have been informed of a high-profile person like Kim.com in his own electorate, with all of these other organisations involved, and he's only informed hours before the arrest warrants go out? Is that
I don't
possible?
think it is, and I think that the moment that you've got Campbell Live making little spider maps of who knew what at what time, then you're in serious trouble.
Yeah, and there's there's an interesting picture that ultimately gets painted of this administration out of all of this, that takes you past the who did what and who knew when thing, but endures, because it becomes very clear that what you've got is a bunch of alpha males, all bigger than one another, all sniffing around each other's backside. And to start with, the bigger one is .com because he's a man with a lot of money, so they think he's great. But then the bigger dog turns up, which is the FBI, who they suck up to much more assiduously, and suddenly they dump on poor old .com. And as they did with Time Warner, and as they've done with any heavy hitter who comes here, and as they clearly do between, say, Banks and his mate Williamson, it's all bowing to the alpha dog and principle be stuffed.
Right.
It's got nothing to do with it, all to do with expediency and what you can do for the dog that's bigger than you.
A question both of you. I predict now predicting a by-election in Epsom, and that John Banks and Morris Williamson will be stood down by the end of this month. What are your punts?
Oh, I definitely put a punt on that.
Yeah. So the by-election, you think that's on?
Possibly. It depends. I mean, this can go either way.
Yeah.
But I think the evidence is there in terms of the way that this is going to spin out, that this is going to be something that Key can't not
Can't
avoid.
control.
Yeah.
If we get some more solid evidence about the aspect of Williamson and Banks and how far they were, how often those exchanges were taking place on the updating of the status of the application, I think that's the kind of thing that might tip it. And
Right.
the Beehive, which is nothing if not PR sensitive, because the whole bloody government's being run on a PR perception platform, are going to say, enough with this, we'll cut our losses here.
If a by-election happens, who'll run?
Well, this is an interesting one, and I don't know. I mean, there's been a really interesting post on Tim Watkins' blog. It wasn't Tim Watkin, it was, oh, sorry, I've forgotten his name, but he was talking about the possibility of Colin Craig coming through. I don't know, given his last results, whether that will be the case.
Would Rodney Hyde run again?
Well,
Would Rodney come on? Would Rodney's
Rodney's
come back?
boxing.
No, I don't see that, but I agree about Colin Craig. He did a very impressive campaign actually in Epsom. He had cause I also saw him at close quarters in the mayoral campaign, and he learned a lot from that. And
Right.
he did very well in
He did,
this
he
one.
did.
And they actually stand to become this rump support partner for the Nats in the next election in the absence of
Right.
National, and so it would actually be in National's interest to give him a little encouragement along. So I would see him there. I'd also see Jackson Wood there. Jackson ran in the who's of some notoriety from Salient magazine in the past, and these days with the New Zealand Drug Foundation, and a very canny young man who revealed himself yesterday to have been the originator of Dr. Brash on Twitter. Yeah, he loves being a prank candidate. He did it in David Shearer's by-election, and I would expect to see him there, and I think that'll probably be the most valuable appearance of any candidate.
I certainly think that if for the left, they should look to support an independent candidate, all of them. One candidate who's only going to be there for a short period of time, and their one mandate is not to sell assets. I think that would motivate a lot of voters. Thank you, panel. Moving on to issue 2. While the .com gate fiasco is diverting attention, ACC deceives over Bronwyn Puller's supposed threats and student loan repayment thresholds are lowered. What are the ramifications? Phoebe, astounding revelations this week that the ACC interview with Bogan Puller was recorded, and that the recording doesn't show the accusations ACC made that Puller or Bogue threatened them. What are the ramifications here?
Well, this is extraordinary, isn't it, in terms of what is playing out here over the privacy breaches. I mean, it is, you know, I think Labor is right, Andrew Little is right, there are still some questions around this, but this also shows us that you've got ministries that
out of control.
Out of
Totally
control.
Out of control.
So I think, you know, it's going to be really interesting to see what that investigation comes back with.
Mm.
Yeah.
David, this week Judith Collins refused to express confidence in ACC's version of what took place, with their own defamation action against Trevor Mallard and Andrew Little, while an investigation of how Bronwyn's name was leaked to the media. How much of Judith Collins' own career and reputation is at risk now?
I don't think she's especially vulnerable here. It was interesting to see that Key actually took a more defensive posture with ACC. He said, well, the thing about recordings is you don't know if it covers all of the exchange, and that's true. You know, it could. The kind of the intimidation might well have been something said in the stairwell, the elevator lobby at the conclusion. Who knows? I can see that possibility. So I'm not sure that this is slam dunk yet. And I've got to say, as you mentioned, I had my own bike crash and a couple of weeks ago, and I got, within a week, I had a letter from ACC telling me how sorry they were to hear of my bike crash, and but assuring me I was covered in all things. Now, I too had been socialising like Bronwyn Puller, and they don't seem to see any. Actually, just to add to the amusement, I posted about this on Facebook, and Ruth Dyson, the former minister of the ACC, chimed in too. So, you know, I've got some heavy... But I'm not going to call on that acquaintance in the way that this woman did, and that's probably why I'll be okay and she's not, and that's my actual point. That you start to play those kinds of influence games, you're asking for trouble, and a corporation will get defensive, and I think that's what's happened here. And they may well have been. You may find that some people were imprudent because they got their backs up. And but out of all of these people, the person I see least likely to come out with any dust on her at all is Judith Collins.
Really? Phoebe, how are the 500,000 New Zealanders with loans supposed to pay more while saving for KiwiSaver and trying to get into a property market that now is at bubble levels again. Is this the cherry on top of the intergenerational theft cake?
I don't know if it's a cherry on top. I mean, it's looking like it will go up maybe 1 to 2.5%, right? But I think that's placing increasing pressure on students. I think it's going to add to our brain drain. I know that a lot of my students are desperate to get overseas to earn higher wages, precisely to pay back their loans as soon as they're finished. And I can say that it's certainly something I've considered myself. So I think there is a danger, and I think there is also a political danger in this too, that you are targeting people that are in that voting age bracket, that this is a push button issue. But there are bigger issues around this and bigger issues around keeping our skilled workers in the country. I think a student loan is different than a mortgage.
National, David, will save $70 million by lowering the repayment threshold, but 500,000 New Zealanders will be impacted. Is the political equation here a belief that they are too apathetic to vote?
Or that they've already lost them to the Greens.
Perhaps. Right.
But I think actually what this will do is ensure that the Greens do get to 15% or past it. There's a real momentum in that age group towards Greens, and this will only encourage it. And I've got a suggestion for the National Party. If they actually want to get their 70 million, or let's say 700 million, let's say a couple of billion, how about you put back on the table the stupid proposition that John Key put early on in his political career, that he would never let the superannuation qualification age rise. That is the most obvious way for us to correct an imbalance in our economy, and he's just not doing it because he said he would resign if he did. And if he's shown himself to be elastic on so many other bloody things, why can't he be elastic on the one that actually matters?
No, I would agree with you there, David. I would say that, you know, if the Ministry of Labour is saying that by 2050 half of our population is going to be over the age of 40, we are placing more and more pressure on the people that are working that need to create those taxes to continue that super. And super is the one big thing in the room that, you know, is not being looked at here.
Do you think, though, that for young people in New Zealand, politically, they're always going to get squeezed by the simple reality you've got a hell of a lot more baby boomers as a voting bloc than anyone else? That always the rewards and the benefits of society are going to be sucked to that group and not for the rest of society.
Well, I'm a baby boomer and I'm never voting for that shit, frankly. And I know plenty of people like that. If I may say that on your program, Bomber, may I?
Certainly can.
But it's the fact, you know?
But I think it's that statistically, the older that you get, the more likely you are to vote. So it's about voter turnout too, across the age groups.
Thank you. Talking of diversions, last question on this. Was the watered-down liquor legislation evidence of how much the liquor industry lobby succeeded? I mean, it's a pretty pathetic final decision they've come up with, isn't it?
Texts from parents, yes.
Texts from parents. Are you drinking too much? Is that really the solution? Or should that cheap, dirty alcohol have another $5 thrown on top of it?
RTDs are the single biggest problem we've got, and they shouldn't be cheap, and they shouldn't even be marketed or made. They're a relatively recent innovation, and they've done nothing but harm. There's a thing to start. But the bigger answer is they should have taken the whole damn thing that Jeffrey Palmer put together, because when he does something like that, he actually does it pretty well. And when he sees that this bit goes with this bit goes with this bit, he's actually talked to experts who explained why that's a good idea. Just cherry picking this in the way that this government does so many damn things is a recipe for failure.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight. David Cunliffe gave a speech in the weekend announcing the last 30 years of neoliberal Washington consensus. Should Shearer be nervous? Phoebe, David Cunliffe contends that one of the reasons Labour didn't attract support from the nearly million-year-old voters who didn't bother to vote was simply because Labour was still wedded to free market economics and were only a lighter shade of blue. Is he right?
I don't think that is entirely correct there. I think that Labour and National to some extent are always fighting over the centre. I think it had a lot to do perhaps with the numbers flubbers that Gough did during the election. I think that was one thing that really hurt them, was that they didn't have a strong enough leadership contender. I mean, I read Cunliffe's speech and I thought, you know, a lot of that was politicking. And I mean, it's going to be really interesting because you have had people like Chris Trotter completely denounce Shearer, and that is one thing that I've always said, is that if Shearer doesn't step up to the table, there is a Cunliffe waiting at his ankles. And I think you're beginning to see that now.
And that's what you think the move is?
I think it is. I mean, at this point, he is still very much stating his support for Shearer, but no, I thought it was politicking. It was a great speech, but I don't know whether he was entirely denouncing.
In November, the rules of how a Labour Party leader is selected will change, and there was a lot of perception, a lot of talk that it will include the wider membership. That was one of the arguments made. If that's the case, Cunliffe then is a shoo-in, isn't it?
I think it depends on Shearer's performance, and I think Shearer has got to start coming out strong now, because I don't think we've seen enough of him, and I don't think he's come out as enough of a viable contender. I think this, you know, release things very slowly. You know, it might work with someone like John Key, but I don't think it's doing the same thing with Shearer.
I would have thought that with David Shearer, that they would have locked him in a bloody room with Brian Edwards for a month to get him so sharp, so much more, you know, able to answer those questions and those answers, and put the questions and answers in a 30-second soundbite. They haven't done any of that. You see him in debates and in interviews, and he just starts trailing off after 30 seconds. Why haven't they got him ready for this?
Well, I think that it's quite obvious that there's some internal stuff going on in Labour. I mean, you had the departure of Stuart Nash, and I think that there's, you know, obviously rifts over the way that Shearer is going to play his position. And I think that Cunliffe's speech, I think, says that we are beginning to see that Cunliffe might come through.
David, with Shearer languishing in the polls, should a speech like this by Cunliffe set the clock ticking on a leadership challenge?
No, not necessarily. When you say languishing in the polls, don't forget that the Herald one this week actually had that hell of a fillip. And it's also worth bearing in mind that people who don't pay a lot of attention to politics do talk about this differently, and those people, when you hear them talking about David Shearer, still like the idea that he's not a politician as in politics as usual, and that really is a strength for him. What he has to do, very clearly, is articulate where he's going to take the country, and he's got to do it in the next couple of speeches, I would suggest. And that contrasts with the Cunliffe one in the respect that while there was a lot of enthusiasm for that speech, there were also people saying, yes, but then what do you do in its place? And that's really where Shearer has started with all of the communication he's been doing, which is saying, well, I recognise that I've got to tell you what I'm going to do when I'm in charge. So he doesn't actually have the luxury of just restating what actually I think everybody on the left understands already. Yes, the Washington Consensus was a crock. Of course it bloody was. But now what? And specifically what? And if you look at what he's been talking about so far, I see threads mostly in there of what Sir Paul Callaghan talked about. And frankly, I don't think you have many other options for a little country like this. And if that's where he wants to go with it, with this, you know, clean, green, clever economy and high value, and actually has specific ideas for getting there, like education, which which is where he started. Well, I think that's actually the foundation of something. And don't forget, this poor guy, he's only been in politics a couple of years, and he's already doing the hardest job in Parliament. I'd actually cut him a bit of, if you don't mind me using the word, slack.
Cut him a little slack. Do you think perhaps it was the Labour Party's fault for throwing all of their hopes and dreams on the shoulders of such an inexperienced politician?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, if they lose the election, yes, but they've got 2.5 years to that. So there's plenty of room for something to come together there. And I think they were right to have an instinct that just going on in the way they were, it wasn't a good idea. And Phoebe's dead right. I think it was lost at the very moment that John Key said, show me the money.
And I think that's the thing, is that we talk about a smart, clean, green economy, which I do agree with. But I think that, you know, at that kind of crux of the election was right when we saw Leadbeater's ideas of the knowledge economy beginning to collapse. And that was largely the continuation of a process since the 1970s, where we had the kind of conflation of multinational capital and you know, things like manufacturing increasingly being moved offshore. And so, you know, the kind of models for that kind of knowledge economy like Ireland were, you know, really under severe financial strain. And we are seeing a shift in the power balance, I guess, towards countries like China and India, which, you know, America will try and maintain through media and military. So there was, you know, that election occurred at a kind of particular crisis point in history, I guess, which made it really quite hard for those sorts of arguments.
Final
For a
question.
little cork bobbing around in the bottom of the
Yeah.
ocean.
Final
Well, for
question.
voters, you know,
Yeah.
feeling overwhelmed, you know, how do
Dead
you
right.
respond to economic crisis?
How does Labour remain the second largest political party?
I actually think I've said this before, that as a bloc they'll get there, them and the Greens, and I think the distinction needs to be Greens principally environment, but all of those other policies as well, and Labour principally, but those other things as well.
Economy?
The language of a workers' rights party, but in the 21st century, where you no longer use the union language because everybody thinks they're about to be a boss and they don't want to hear union talk. But actually, they do want to hear about all of the things that unions always talked about, which is you're working longer for less, you're seeing less of your kids, it's harder to get ahead. What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah. Phoebe, how do they remain the second largest?
Well, I would agree with David, and I think the last couple of weeks, you know, Labour are really being handed an opportunity here, aren't they, with all the things that are happening with National.
And maybe that, and again, that's another reason for the criticism, I suppose, at Shearer. Labour have never had a better time to get runs on the board, have they? Let's wrap the show with last word. Phoebe, your last word this week.
My last word was actually about the boat people. I am quite concerned, I have been following this for a while, this idea of a detention centre in Indonesia, which really is not a good country with a record for human rights. And Key's speeches on West Papua in Indonesia were rather interesting too, when he was talking to 3 News and he called it Papua instead of West Papua 3 times when he was talking about human rights, where, you know, Papua New Guinea is a slightly different country than West Papua. So I am watching that boat people issue, because I think that in terms of closer relations between us and Australia, their record for detention centres is not good.
Final word, David.
I read something this morning that encapsulated something very concisely that has concerned me for a long time now, and it said it this way. It said, more people are dying from being in the world are dying from being overweight than are dying from being underweight. Now, we've reached a disappointing point when we come to that. It says a lot of things about the way we produce as a planet too. But the principal one is, anybody, if you're eating that much that it's going to cut your life short, please think again. You know, I know that we've got a national government, we've got the GC, but it'll get better. You don't have to eat yourself to an early grave.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, David, ladies and gentlemen. To my final word. Today is World Press Freedom Day, a day set aside to respect the importance of a free media and the role of watchdog governments. When compared to the terrible things many governments do to journalists around the planet, World Press Freedom Day loses some of its loftier high ground in New Zealand. However, while we don't torture, murder or detain journalists here in New Zealand, we face the opposite problem, a bought press that is just as unfree as any run by an authoritarian regime. Public broadcasting is what makes a free press free. When left to the entertainment-driven ratings focus of media corporates holding the powerful to account, is well below the importance of profit margins. The UK inquiry into media ethics this week found Rupert Murdoch not fit to run an international media company. Rupert, of course, owns our largest media outlet, Sky TV. Sky TV enjoys an unchallenged near monopoly. MediaWorks get multi-millions in loan deferments, and TVNZ is on the block to be sold off. So the government are in Sky TV's pocket while keeping MediaWorks in their pocket while selling all of TVNZ's pockets. With TVNZ 7 about to be hoarded off to a shopping channel and New Zealand on air handing out public money to New Zealand's Got Talent in the GC, World Press Freedom Day should remind New Zealanders that a free press isn't free. Just because they broadcast it to the public doesn't make it public broadcasting. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Don't forget, my new show, The Union Report, plays 8 p.m. Monday nights here on Triangle TV, the home of original public broadcasting. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.